Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, it's Sean, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. I don't believe in writer's block, but I couldn't write for several months. It was around the year 2014 or so. For several months, I hadn't written a word despite wanting to do so. It wasn't like I was bored or burned out or even lost my skill. It's just that I couldn't write. And this meant that my wife Renuka was forced to rerun almost 3 months' worth of newsletters based on articles that had been published in the past. What was stopping me from writing, I wondered. I looked through my earlier articles hoping to find an answer, and it was then that I realized that there was a common thread. In all of the previous articles, I wasn't writing. Instead, I was reacting. The big reason why I wasn't moving forward was apparent. Instead of reacting, I was trying to be an author and write from the ground up. But why does writing from the ground up make us so very grumpy? When you sit down to write a new course, or you write a book or a screenplay, it's pretty hard. You have to go from the ground up. It's an uphill climb. And because you're often creating something from nothing, it's just so frustrating. Like me, you just get grumpy. You get upset. You don't know where you're going. You get stuck. You don't know where to start. And this is for two precise reasons. The first is that the work is extensive. When you look at a workshop or a course, it may consist of several hundred slides. That's the workshop. And then all of those slides need to fit cohesively together. If it's a book you're writing, then you have 100, 150 pages, and all of that has to make sense back to back. The vastness of the subject matter causes the writer to freeze, or at least endlessly procrastinate. And the mistake that we make when writing an article is that we take the act of writing a book or writing a screenplay or writing something vast and enormous, and then we put the same thing into writing an article. An article doesn't need to and shouldn't start from zero. Instead, it should always be a reaction. Let's take an example. Let's say someone is having a hard time writing an article, and they take hours, days, maybe even a week. They write about their frustrations or they express it somewhere. At that precise point in time, you realize you have a solution to that problem. You are therefore reacting rather than creating from zero. Which is to say, you read something, you listen to something, you watch something, and then you have an opinion about it and you react to it. And this is completely different from writing a book, from writing a screenplay, from creating a presentation, because all of that has to start from zero. All of that is frustrating, but an article doesn't need to be that way. If you start from absolutely nothing, you're always going to struggle. Take, for example, an article I've been meaning to write. It's called Is Fame Necessary for Business? That idea popped into my head when watching a series on YouTube 3 years ago. I still haven't got down to writing that article. And that's not the only idea that's been stalled. A second article called 3 Chefs and the Lessons I've Learned from Them. Once again, that's been on a post-it on my wall. And luckily, there's a date for it as well. And it says April 2016. By Feb 2021, I still haven't gotten down to writing that piece. And it's not for want of skill either. I write every day, often a few thousand words every day. I answer long posts on the membership site at 5000 BC. You're listening to this podcast. We create the podcast. There is no shortage of skill. Whenever I struggle, whenever I find that writer's block to show up, That's because I'm trying to create from nothing instead of just reacting to a question or a comment or even another article. Every time I struggle, I'm starting from zero. And in the process, many other articles get written, but the ones that I intend to write, they remain dormant. It's not as if to suggest that you should only write using one method. You can't go the rest of your life just reacting to articles and writing. There are going to be articles that you're going to start from scratch. But if you're writing on a consistent basis, if you want that stream of work, you're going to need a reaction-based strategy. As writers, we need all the energy we can get. An article is not just an article. You have an opening line, the first paragraph, you have stories, you have examples, objections, and then there's the structure of the article and the reconnection at the end. What seems to be one article is close to a dozen elements, all of which need to stack up against each other. Even when you're skilled, even when you know what you're doing, having to assemble an article is a fair amount of work, and you're using a lot of your energy. When you're reacting, however, you're feeding off the thoughts or the words of another person. If you have clients, they have questions, and you respond to their queries. But even if you don't have clients, you can be reading a book or listening to a podcast, and then you find your view of the world is slightly different from the author or the speaker. Take, for example, the concept of creating habits. At one point in my life, I thought it took about 21 days to create a habit. Books will tell you that it takes time to build and fortify a habit. Even so, as I read a book by an author who sold hundreds of thousands of copies, I realized that the 21-day habit creation was just a myth. Habits are formed or demolished in a mere instant. You can avoid sugar for 10 months and then, for no apparent reason, find a biscuit irresistible. Or you could be gobbling biscuits voraciously for 10 months and then you decide to give it up with no prior notice. For example, my father smoked 20 cigarettes a day for almost 15 years of his life. I even have a picture of the two of us on the day of my baptism. So there I am as a baby in his arms, and yes, he's got a cigarette in his hand. Did he follow a 21-day pattern when giving up? Not at all. He decided to give up the smoking habit and he threw his half-filled cigarette packet out of the second-floor window. And that's how he kicked the habit. As you can see, I reacted strongly to the contents of the book. In that particular case, I had my own opinion, my own way of looking at the world. You also have that power, and you need to be on the lookout for energy from another source continually. Where do you find these sources? Things that you disagree with or very strongly agree with, or questions that come at you from clients or from a forum or a group. When you fail to react, things sound boring. They take longer. It feels like a chore. If you know that you can write articles, if you have the system in place, if you have all the elements in place, and it's still taking you ages to write an article, then it's not your skill that's the problem. It is that you're starting from the ground up. And that's something that you need to get rid of as quickly as possible and start to react. When you read articles online that are boring and repetitive, that's where they're coming from. They're coming from this need to create something every single time, which is very tiring, very boring. And the irony is that it has taken twice or thrice the time to create that very tedious article. So avoid that and react to content, and that's how you work out this article writing strategy going forward. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. There's not much of a summary to do, but we'll do it anyway. Most of us approach our writing as if it were a school project, where you have to write "My Day at the Zoo," and then you have to come up with everything that you did. And that requires a lot of planning. Instead, if someone says zoos are terrible for kids, and you're a kid, and you want to write about, hey, I loved my day at the zoo. Well, what you're doing now is reacting rather than having to write from the ground up. And yes, the content might end up the same way, but there is a difference. The difference is the emotion you feel because you're reacting. All of those boring articles are boring because there's no emotion. It's just the how-to, blah, blah, blah. And that's not interesting. In fact, this very article was a reaction, a question that came from a client. And the client said, I've been taking over a week to write an article, and this is how I approach it. And so it was a reaction rather than me thinking, oops, what am I going to write today? In any case, the one thing that you have to do today is you start to read a lot of stuff or listen to a lot of stuff. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I watch a lot of YouTube. And if it is in your field, you're going to react to it. You're going to have some reaction to it, whether positive or negative, or maybe you just agree with it. Either way, that gives you the basis for writing an article. And then you go for it. You just go for it. Or you go into some forums, or you go into, a group somewhere, and you just write. Don't think of writing an article. Just respond to that in great detail. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. Let's find out what's happening in psychotactics land. This podcast is going out on the last day of February. That's the 27th of February. It's also the day that the copywriting course is on sale. That's a copywriting/landing pages course. And for the first time, I think close to 10 years, we're doing it online, systematically, as we always do with most psychotactics courses. And there are just 16 seats. As you can tell, we're more fussy about getting you to the other side. And this course was built so that when you finish this course, you can put a sales page together in 3 days. If you're a copywriter, if you're not a copywriter, it doesn't matter. You can put it together in 3 days, which is really handy because if you outsource your copywriting work, you're going to pay a few $1,000s every single time you have a new product, a new service, a new workshop, and that can get pretty costly. Plus, you don't know how to audit it. You don't know whether they're doing a good job or not. And that's why this copywriting/landing pages course is so crucial. We're talking about the live version, of course, and later in the year, we'll have a home study version as well. And you can follow along if that's what you prefer. If you missed the course and you're wondering, wait a second, what am I going to do waiting for either the home study or another course? Well, you can go to Client Attractors. So if you go to psychotactics.com and you go to products, you will find a product that's under $50, and it's called Client Attractors. And it shows you how to write bullets and how to write benefits and features. You may think, oh, what's the big deal with that? You'll be surprised because that's how we start writing the sales page. That's how we start the whole copywriting journey. So it's the basis, it's that rock on which you build everything. And if you haven't read Client Attractors and you haven't implemented that stuff, well, if you haven't read it, you haven't implemented it. But just so you know what I'm saying, that stuff is pretty crucial and it's quite well priced. So go there and check it out. It's called Client Attractors. And it gives you a big head start. You won't believe how much you learn in that tiny little book. That's it from Psychotactics Land. I'll say bye for now. Bye-bye. Still listening? So on my office wall, there are a bunch of Post-its. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, about 15 Post-its. And they've got the names of the articles that I intend to write. Some of them are about increasing prices, instant uniqueness, the want factor, exploring contrast, book review, deconstruction, and learn quickly, 3 chefs. Well, there are a whole bunch of them. There are about 15 of them. And guess what? I went through all of them, and they were not reactions. They were something that I did sitting down at a cafe and then coming back home and then putting it on Post-its, putting them on the wall, doing all the drama. And most of those articles haven't been written. Since when? Since 2016. I had no idea that 5 years have passed since I put those post-its up, and I still haven't written those articles. And probably another 5 will pass before I even get down to it. So that's all I'm saying. Try and react rather than write. Otherwise, you'll end up with a whole bunch of post-its if your strategy is a bit like mine. Anyway, I'll see you in 5000 BC, and I'll say bye for now. Bye-bye.